Okay, so welcome to tonight's webinar. It's all about the National Lottery Awards for All funding. My name's Debs McCann and I'm Woodcraft Folk's Chief Executive. In this session, we're going to go through the Awards for All criteria, which is slightly different in Scotland from England and Wales, so we will cover both. We'll go through the application form, which has been much reduced in recent years to make it really simple to apply for. We will cover what types of applications Woodcraft Folk groups have previously submitted that have been successful with Awards for All criteria. I'm also pleased to say that we are willing to share previous examples of successful applications, although it should be noted that some of them are on earlier layouts of the form, and therefore some of them have questions that you are no longer required to answer. We'll go through exactly all the information you need before preparing for your application and any restrictions that the National Lottery have in place for this funding. And we will end the session looking about what available support there is within the movement for local groups and districts who are hoping to submit an application. Awards for All has been around for a very long time, and perhaps if I'd thought about this, I'd have actually looked up in advance, but it's been going for possibly 30 years, maybe even longer. And we recommend Awards for All as a very simple, light touch funding source for all of our groups and districts. So branches, whether or not that's a group, a district or a centre, are strongly encouraged to seek external funding for any development activity or running costs. Awards for All is very commonly approached for new equipment, but they will fund other things. When applying for funding, you should use the charity number that Woodcraft Folk has, which is 1148195. I write that quite a lot. We are one charity from the smallest wood chip group to the largest centre, and we should use that number whenever we are seeking external funding. And if you need support, please email funding@woodcraft.org.uk, whether or not you want somebody to give you an idea or a suggestion about what to apply for, whether or not you're looking for a list of suitable funds you might approach, or if you have a draft application that you want somebody to proofread, just drop us an email. Now, give us some time to respond. It's not going to be instant, so please don't send it the day before any deadlines. But by all means, reach out for support. You know, we are a cooperative movement. We are here to help. But anyway, this webinar is going to focus on Awards for All. So the lovely thing about Awards for All is that there are no deadlines. You can apply whenever you wish. The other thing about Awards for All is that you can have one live grant for every bank account within the organisation. So if you're a district with 3 or 4 bank accounts, you could have 3 or 4 applications at any one time. Now, a live grant is one that you are currently spending until the final report is submitted. Up until November this year, the expectation is that all projects funded by Awards for All will start and finish within a 12-month period. Now, things at Awards for All are changing on the 15th of November, which is really exciting. These are changes for the first time in, as I said, nearly 30 years. The grant amounts are currently from £300 to up to £10,000, and that's per 12-month period per bank account within the organisation. But from the 15th of November, that's doubling. So in one application, you could potentially apply for up to £20,000. Now, it doesn't really make a difference if you're applying for 5,000, 10,000, 20,000. You will still need to demonstrate that you're meeting the criteria. So you're not likely to be more successful if you ask for less. The grants officer is making an assessment about whether or not your project or your activity meets the criteria, is well thought out, and therefore if it demonstrates value for money. So if it's a really big project, it is going to cost £20,000, and if it isn't, and it can be done for £5,000 of a quality, that's what the grants officer will be looking at. So please concentrate on the activity first and then work out how much that will cost, rather than start with the amount of money. The thing that's also changing on the 15th of November is that projects for the first time can run for 24 months. Which gives you an opportunity to do some development, and maybe things are not quite as rushed. So historically, some Woodcraft Folk groups have applied for funding for the development of new groups. Having 2 years to work with a new volunteer team is going to support their sustainability far more than just a 12-month period. So that's really good news for lots of organisations, but incredibly good news for those groups who want to use this to grow the organisation. The other important thing about Awards for All is it doesn't have to be new activity. It can be existing activity. So it doesn't have to be a new group. It could be sustaining your existing group. It could be, in England and Wales, particularly designed to try and support engagement as cost of living is impacting on lots and lots of families. But we'll talk about the criteria in a minute. Awards for All is famously really quick turnaround, although they do say it's going to take 16 weeks to process an application and get a response. Sometimes they can be a bit quicker than 16 weeks, but expect 16 weeks from when you submit to before you can start your activity. Hopefully that's really clear. So there's no deadline. After the 15th of November, it can be up to 20,000, and it can last for up to 24 months for both new and existing activity. Sorry for repeating myself, but that's really key information. The criteria in Wales and England are based on 4 things, and I will go through each of these in turn to try and explore the types of projects that might be suitable within a Woodcraft Folk context. So the first one is really simply about bringing people together, building relationships and creating that sense of community where communities have shared experiences and try to improve their services locally. The second one is about the spaces and the places. So these might be more environmental focused, but about how and where people come together within their communities. Now, as Woodcraft Folk has very limited access to buildings and property, this one potentially may be less relevant to a local group unless you focus on the green environment. And we'll come to some of those complications in a minute. The third one is about helping people to reach their potential. So skills and development training of individuals is the key point for that criteria. Now, a new criteria introduced by Awards for All in England and Wales is this one about supporting communities and people as they respond to the challenges of the cost of living crisis. So this might be about how you provide subsidies or how you break down financial barriers that perhaps some families might be experiencing when they want to engage in Woodcraft Folk. I think this criteria will be quite difficult for Woodcraft Folk groups to apply for, but it is there, and I'd be interested in talking to people if they've got some ideas and suggestions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at each of the criteria in turn. In Scotland, as I mentioned earlier, the criteria is slightly different, so they don't have this new cost of living response criteria, but are still focused on bringing people together, improving places and spaces, and helping people reach their potential. Just 3 very broad criteria. Awards for All is a very generic grassroots community fund, which can fund everything from celebrations to first aid training, the lot. So I'm going to go through the types of things it can be spent on. So it's not meant for regular salaries, but it could be used to provide some staff costs or the engagement of a specialist a trainer, maybe an activity instructor, somebody who is sharing their skills and knowledge to improve the skills of our volunteers or young people. But it can be used also for everyday running costs of a group. So hall rent, refreshments, art materials. It can be used for one-off events, whether or not that's a camp or a trip or an activity, and therefore that could be the transport, the food, the volunteer expenses. It really is very, very broad about what you can spend your money on. Now, they don't support spend for overseas and international activity, and clearly there are some restrictions. So big parties, if they're described as a party, no. But as we're heading to our centenary, celebrating the impact of Woodcraft Folk over 100 years might be eligible, although it's likely that Awards for All will suggest that that's an application that would be better suited going to the Heritage Lottery Fund. It is worth remembering that Awards for All is the generic lottery fund for small community groups. And therefore, if your application is based on sports activities or heritage activities, the National Lottery will expect you to go to those lottery funds rather than this one. As we go through, if anybody has any questions, by all means, just unmute yourself and ask, or stick the question in the chat. Now, Woodcraft Folk has a long history of drawing down local grants from Awards for All. And in the past, these grants have been used for lots of different things, lots of equipment, lots of marquees, lots of tents, lots of bushcraft equipment, knives, kettles, you name it, has been funded. The last time I sat down with the Awards for All officer to discuss Woodcraft Folk applications, they did specifically ask for less applications asking for marquees and tents. But it is something that could be included if that is something that you are in desperate need of. We've also had in recent years successful applications for new group development. We had one in Leicester last year, which was funded by Awards for All. Lots of volunteer training, whether or not that's bushcraft training, food hygiene training, safeguarding training, you name it. And that includes the volunteer expenses to get to the training, a trainer, the venue, the refreshments, accreditation if there's a cost associated to that. Something that really adds value to the volunteer experience and gives them confidence in their volunteering role. Last year at Common Ground, we had a couple of districts who were successful in getting funding to get their group to camp, both in terms of paying for travel, their camp fees, and equipment such as sleeping bags for those families who didn't have their own. Because Awards for All fund existing activities and day-to-day running costs, hall rent, which we know is the biggest expense for all of our groups, can also be included. And we have had groups, particularly those who are going through difficult times, rebuilding after COVID, or who've had to move. And I'm aware of some groups who have had to move following the school concrete crisis this month. So if your hall rent has gone up, this could be a source of application, although it's worth pointing out that the funding cannot be backdated, so it's got to be new spend. So perhaps the crisis concrete isn't an example to look at. Other project successes have been youth-led projects. So we had a group who did a community orchard that was funded. We also had one who did a road safety campaign funded through Awards for All. Lots of residential trips, particularly residential trips for those who haven't been on one before, whether or not that's a new generation of elfins and elfin parents or a new group. And we've also had people who have had success in getting funding to do play out and community outreach activities, or to work in partnership with, say, the Young Carers, for example, is one from North London that was successful with an Awards for All application just before COVID. So I think hopefully you're getting from this that actually there's a huge number of opportunities, and it's really about the ambitions of your group and district and the things that are important to you. When you're writing the application, the grants officer will want to see that there is passion and a commitment for the idea, and that it's just not something that you're desperately fishing to get some funding for. As I said at the very beginning, we are interested in giving you support, proofreading your applications, so we're more than happy to give you some feedback. I'm going to go through now the application form section by section. Now, I'm not allowed to copy it because it's an online system, but the application form is really, really simple. So it starts with background information. So you need to come up with a project name. Don't sweat the project name. It doesn't really matter. Ideally, try and make it as clear to the activity. So if you're setting up a new group in Bristol, say Bristol New Group. If you're doing a camp for elfins, call it the Elfin Camp Project, but don't get too worried about it. The background information also asks you to state your local authority and your postcode. Awards for All are always really keen to try and have a geographical spread of where their funding is delivered, which means that the same application delivered in 2 different parts of the country may get 2 different responses, because in one area there's been an oversubscription of applications, and in another they've been undersubscribed, where your project is more likely to be successful. There's not a lot you can do about that, but you can just submit your application and try. In the background information, it will ask you for a preferred date. That preferred date has to be at least 16 weeks after the date that you submit the application. So do get your calendars out and count. They will also ask you to identify when you plan to finish the project. Now, remember, from the 15th of November, projects can last for 24 months. So there's plenty of time. It is always better to give yourself a few months, because things will slip, things will happen, than try and squeeze in things in too short a time scale. It's clearly really easy to guess end dates if you're talking about specific events, but just add on a few months to give yourself enough time, because nobody wants to rush when they're juggling everything else at once. The second part of the application is simply what. Now, as with all online application forms, there is a word limit. You have to write somewhere between 50 and 300 words, which is not very much. So concise writing, and think about how you can get as much information as you possibly can. Write it in bullet points if you find that easier. So the questions that they want you to answer in this what question is simply, what would you like to do and who's it going to benefit? So if you are setting up a new group, you might say, set up a new Elfin Woodcraft group for children aged 6 to 9. It's really simple, really clear, not very many words. It will ask you if it's something new or existing. If you can insert the word new into that first sentence about what you'd like to do, that gets away with answering that one. Then it asks about the difference that you will make, and there it's really important to go back to that original criteria. So remember the criteria about bringing people together, improving places or spaces, or helping people reach their potential. So the difference you might want to make is reducing isolation. You might want to support the development of support networks for people. You might want to improve the skills and knowledge of individuals. So whatever you want to do, try and make sure you link it back to that original criteria, so that it's really clear and the grants officer can follow how your project meets the grant criteria. It then asks, and this is an awful lot to squeeze into 300 words, how will you make people know about it? And it's fine just to put bullet points of social media, newsletters, those types of things. Tell them about your existing networks, your existing partnerships, whether or not that's with a local housing association, or whether or not that's with your local council for voluntary service. But they will expect you to be able to reach out and engage new people in that activity. And a presentation at the local school would be perfectly fine if you were thinking about setting up a new group. There's something here also about how you will learn. So that's really about how will you evaluate and monitor the project. And therefore that is, again, very, very tricky to fit into this word count. And therefore, it is something that you need to make sure that you think about, that it may be that you have a feedback questionnaire from your volunteers who've done the training. It may be that you keep a diary that you're going to share with the wider Woodcraft Folk network as you set up your new group with lessons that you've learnt. It doesn't have to be overly complicated, but you do need to think about one way that you're going to help track and reflect on the successes and the things that could be better in your project activity, all within 300 words. In this section, I just want to go through the criteria to give you an idea. So remember, the first criteria was about bringing people together. And the things to celebrate in Woodcraft Folk here are the intergenerational approach that we use, bringing together children and adults working cooperatively to improve and provide fun for both generations. You may also want to fund fun days, activities, outreach, play out. All of those things are suitable. It might be linked to a local festival. It might be linked to Woodcraft Folk centenary. All of those are fine. It would be lovely if districts up and down the country all submitted applications to run community outreach and play out days to celebrate 100 years of Woodcraft Folk. How fantastic would that be? And in those applications, not only could you include training for the volunteers, the equipment that you want to take to the play out, some publicity, some banners to fly and flags to fly in your local park. You could include the refreshments for your activities, all sorts of things. Some Woody hoodies and some t-shirts to get the name out there. I already mentioned earlier that last year at Common Ground, we had a number of districts who were successful in getting funding to bring their young people to camp. So if you want to attend the Pioneer Camp that's happening next summer, that might be something you could submit an application for, and you'd be in plenty of time to do that. One of the lovely projects that we've done recently was a Young Carers Fun Day, where venturers put on an activity, cooked food for young carers, played some games, did some discussion work, and it was just a really lovely social mixing project where both sets of young people got to learn a little bit about each other, and the venturers got to share their skills with their peers. So yeah, we have had groups who have done outreach work with refugee and other groups. All of these things would be suitable under a Bringing People Together Awards for All application. So really think about how we can span the world with friendship in our communities and collaborate with like-minded organisations. I've already talked about outreach, so I won't talk any more about that. And we have also had success with bringing people together to do residentials for new groups and new teams of volunteers. So I know that there are a number of people who've got out the habit of residentials because of COVID. If it was felt that in your district you wanted to organise a residential just for the volunteers to share and cascade skills, maybe a training event for future KPs, that would be something that could be done under Bringing People Together, although also might fit under helping people reach their potential, both of which is possible. I mentioned the second criteria is about improving places and spaces. Now, we've had less success in this area, although we have had some. So we've had quite a few allotment and community orchard type projects funded under Awards for All. This has included training for volunteers, it's included equipment, both in terms of gardening tools, but also safety equipment and volunteer expenses planting materials, trees, that type of thing. And if you've got an initiative in your area, that might be helpful. In Birmingham, we also was involved in a traffic calming project that saw our groups produce and decorate huge planters as I suppose they weren't moving bollards. They were barriers in the road to slow down traffic, which was a lovely initiative that had some funding through this scheme. We've had groups who've also done litter picking initiatives, really simple, low cost project, buying litter pickers and bags and high vis jackets, that type of thing. So it's really up to you. But this is about spaces. What you would need to do is demonstrate a partnership with the landowner. So if you were doing some work in a local park or in a local forest, they would need to be involved in the project somehow. And in that 300-word summary, you would need to explain what the relationship is between you and the space. The third criteria is about this helping people reach their potential. And I said we've had a number of different applications successful through here. Volunteer recruitment campaigns, volunteer training, and that's been volunteer training for first aid, volunteer training in safeguarding, how to do safe residentials, food hygiene, all sorts of things. So if there is a list that you want, this would be suitable. We had one in South Wales a little while ago that was looking at bushcraft training for the volunteers, as well as little bushcraft kits of equipment. So that might be something that your groups are interested in. It's also not impossible to seek funding for a youth-led social action project. So if there's an initiative locally that your young members want to take action on, all the expenses linked to that could come under here. Although it might fit better under the improving places and spaces, it depends on the theme of the project. But if you're not sure, please reach out to funding@woodcraft.org.uk and we'll give you some feedback. Awards for All staff are also there at the end of a telephone line if you wish to, and will occasionally run local face-to-face sessions and online sessions for potential grantees. So do look out for any of those. But as I said earlier, this is quite a simple application process. So between us, I'm sure we can find the best way to describe your activity to fit the criteria if it's going to. Now, the last one is a new criteria, which is this responding to the cost of living crisis. Now, we haven't submitted any applications under this before because it really is new, but I'm assuming that this is the sort of things that will help with those regular running costs for the groups. So some of our groups have seen an increase in their rent, and therefore that might be something that could be covered under this. As I said, it's costs that haven't already been spent, so we can't backdate it. But if you're looking to try and grow your group and looking for a new venue, then this might be a suitable place to get some funding. I also feel that this is a place where you could do subsidies and look at those, removing those financial barriers for low-income families. It may be more attractive if you were to do that in partnership, say, with your local food bank or find another local community organisation. I think this one is quite difficult for Woodcraft Folk because most of our groups require a sub on a weekly basis or a camp fee to engage, and that's something which Awards for All will find quite difficult to tally when they're looking at this cost of living crisis criteria. But come and talk to us and we'll see how we can present that if that's your preference. My gut feeling is that most of our projects will fit better under bringing people together criteria. So, as I just said a minute ago, you only have to pick one of these four things. So you've only got 50 to 150 words to explain how your project meets the criteria. So don't try and demonstrate how you meet all of the criteria because you're never going to demonstrate the depth that the grants officer is looking for. So my recommendation is that the majority of our approaches are likely to fit bringing people together, unless it is a space and place improvement, and that hopefully should be really obvious. Yes, I think I probably said that. I think that's probably clear. Like I say, 50 to 150 words is not a lot. So please try and be as focused as you possibly can in your responses. The next section of the criteria of the application form focuses on how you involve your community. What Awards for All are looking for is organisations who are embedded and connected with individuals as well as other organisations. So they're not looking to fund the same 15 people who've always been involved in this group or activity. So it's really important then when we're thinking about this, it's about how we can either share Woodcraft Folk experiences with a like-minded organisation or grow the number of people engaging in a Woodcraft Folk experience, whether or not that's as volunteers or as young members. So they will be looking for you to explain how you've involved the local community. So it may be that you have done an online survey. It may be that you have done an assembly at the local school and got some feedback from there. It may be that you have had expressions of interest during a community fair that's generated a waiting list. It may be that you've done a survey of the children who come to your group or the parents who send their children to your group, and that's demonstrated interest in a particular activity that you currently don't do, or demand for training that they are looking for to improve the way that they support the group activities. You're not looking for a very structured methodology here. It is, again, only a very small word count, but they are looking for you to show that you are connected and that you are open to welcoming new people into your activity. The next section, not quite the last section of the application form, is the budget. And they want you to have broad headings. You're only allowed 10 headings in the budget section. And you can include all sorts of things, so no international travel, no booze or alcohol, but you might want to include room hire, you might want to include equipment, you might want to include volunteer expenses. I can just see that there's something in the chat. Let me have a quick look and see. What does the chat say? Do you think we should apply for a package of different volunteer training courses delivered separately? Absolutely, yeah. If you have done a survey about your volunteers and you have 4 volunteers who want to do first aid, and you have 6 volunteers who want to do safeguarding, and 2 volunteers who want to do forest schools, that's perfectly fine to put together a calendar with different providers. In actual fact, it shows a longer term commitment to upskilling that group. And there's a question here about too soon to apply for Camp 100. I don't think it's too soon, and I think it depends on what you're applying for. So my advice, if you're thinking about Camp 100, which is going to be July, August 2025, which actually is quite a long way away, but it's not that far. If you talk about the fact that you want to do a short weekend camp to introduce people to camping, to reduce the barriers of going away on such a large, long camp, that would be sensible, and therefore you'd need time to do that. If you also include volunteer training and sharing skills from one generation of leaders to the next generation in preparation for that big camp, and having a residential where people shadow the KP and shadow the camp coordinator and shadow the equipment and the keeper of the garbage and everything else, then I don't think it is too soon. If you only apply for your camp fees, I think it is too soon. And if also, I believe if you only apply for your camp fees, you're unlikely to be successful, because if you think about Awards for All want you to broaden your reach. If you're applying for camp fees for the same 15 people you're currently involving, it doesn't really demonstrate you're bringing more people together. So I think it's about building the potential of the group and building the sustainability of the group with the Camp 100 event as a focus, but all that development activity before. Hopefully that makes sense. But yeah, back to the budget. In actual fact, there's nothing that shouldn't be able to be included in the budget. They aren't looking to fund long-term staff, but activity providers, trainers, specialists to do something for you is all something that could be included as a legitimate cost. Travel expenses, volunteer expenses, whether or not that's childcare expenses, can all be included. Refreshments, room hire. Think about also the publicity that you need, whether or not that's putting up a sale banner. It would be really lovely every time a Woodcraft Folk group went to go and play in the local park, if they put up their banner and people could see that this is a Woodcraft Folk group out playing in their community. They don't cost much, put it in. The grants officers will decide whether or not they are essential to the project, and I'm sure that it wouldn't be a problem at all. The other thing on the budget section, it asks for lots of organisational details. And you remember at the very beginning, I said that this is Woodcraft Folk is one charity, from the smallest wood chip to the largest centre. So it is really important that you put in Woodcraft Folk and our charity number. So the full legal name of the organisation is Woodcraft Folk, not the Woodcraft Folk. And the name that you want to put on day-to-day work is the name of your local group. Now that name must match the bank account that you're looking for the funds to be paid into. So if your bank account is in your district name, that name used in day-to-day should be your district name. If you've changed the name of your group, but you haven't changed the name of your bank account, you should use the one that's on your bank account. Otherwise, you won't pass the Awards for All fraud checks. It will then ask you about when the organisation was established. Now, we all know that Woodcraft Folk was established in 1925. It says so on the bottom of my screen, but we changed our legal status in January 2012 when we became a registered charity company limited by guarantee. So the right answer in this case is actually January 2012. It will ask you to include the main registered office for the charity, which is now Hollyoak House in Manchester. We moved last April, it's been quite some time now. And the type of organisation Woodcraft Folk is, it's a registered charity. Please don't put in applications not using the national name. It'll get flagged up and it will come back to us anyway. The other organisational details you'll need is the charity registration number. They'll want to know when our accounting year ends, and Woodcraft Folk's financial year is the 1st of January to the 31st of December. When it asks for total income, you can use your total figures locally. Now that's up to you. If you are applying with the district name, use the district figures. If you're applying with a group name, use the group figures. Awards for All and the National Lottery know that Woodcraft Folk branches apply separately, so this will make perfect sense to them. You are also asked to include the senior contact of the organisation, and we use the Chair of General Council, which is currently Aggie Taylor, but that may change depending on when you put in your application. So if you simply email chair@woodcraft.org.uk, we'll be able to give you the details of the senior contact. Now they want to know their name, their date of birth and their address. There are quite a lot of details, which I'm clearly not putting up on a slide here. So please do use that email address to draw down those at the right time when you're ready to apply. The main contact is the person in your local group and district who feels comfortable answering any questions and will be able to respond to emails from the grants officer. That might be your group leader, it might be your treasurer, your district contact. Whoever it is, it doesn't really matter, as long as they've got the agreement of the whole group to submit the application and that they are willing to be available and contactable and answer any questions if the grants officer has any. Now, Awards for All is a very light touch process, so it's unlikely that you will have questions, but you will have to respond to any grant offer within so many days. So make sure that person is comfortable using email. The last part of the application form actually talks about the beneficiaries. I find it really odd that this is the last section and not the first section. It's really a tick box part of the application form. So usually projects will be open to all, or you might be doing a very targeted piece of work with maybe LGBTQ plus young people. And if that's true, tick the targeted box. For most Woodcraft Folk activities, we'll simply be targeting children and young people. And the category there is young people under 25. If you are targeting work with maybe people who are neurodiverse, then tick that. If you're doing some work with refugee children, tick that. But it's perfectly fine if you aren't doing any targeted work, just to simply put young people under 25. If your project is focused on your volunteers, well, then put other people rather than young people under 25. It really doesn't matter, but this whole part of the form is a simple tick, tick, tick box. So not too worried about. Now, there are some restrictions. What you do must be linked to the charitable purposes of Woodcraft Folk. Now, Woodcraft Folk's charitable purposes are really broad, and it's all about supporting young people to engage in our aims and principles. So it's perfectly fine to upskill volunteers to being able to do that, or anything that's linked to young people and our aims and principles. And I'm quite sure that none of you are about to submit applications that aren't linked to our charitable purposes. The application, and I know I've said this before, must be submitted in the name of a current Woodcraft Folk bank account. And I'm aware that the admin of this is quite difficult, and that there are many bank accounts that perhaps use a slightly different name than the group is actually known by, but it's really important. It's exactly as it's presented on your bank statement. You also will need at least 2 signatories on the bank account who are unrelated and do not live at the same address. Now, this is something that we require anyway, so this shouldn't be really difficult. But if this is a problem, please do talk to the membership team and we can add additional signatories to your account. So they can't be related and they can't live at the same address. And in the application form, you simply have to tick a box to confirm that this is true. And because you only have to give one main contact, to be fair, they won't ask you about this, but you will tick and confirm that it is right. Other restrictions, and these ones are now Woodcraft Folk restrictions. So our funding policy requires any group or district to seek permission from our trustee board from General Council if they plan to lease any land or employ any staff. Now, Awards for All, even when it's up to £20,000, is not going to be enough really to take on a lease. There's a difference between short-term rent and a longer-term lease. And it's unlikely that you would employ staff with an Awards for All grant, but you might engage a freelancer. If you need help with that and we need to check insurances and do some due diligence, please contact funding@woodcraft.org.uk and we can support you through that process, because there are policies and procedures in place to protect the organisation. It's not impossible, but we will help you through that. Now, I said earlier, and I've just said again, we want to support our groups to apply. This is a fund that Woodcraft Folk can only access on a local branch level, so Folk Office can't apply. But we are here to help you, so we can give you examples of previously successful application forms. We do have some that are written in the current format, but we also have many, many more from previous iterations of the application form, which will show you just the level of words that people used to have to write for this funding. But sometimes it's just easier to get inspiration about what to write if you've seen what somebody else has written, rather than starting with a blank piece of paper or a blank screen. We also have a funding working group, which is made up of staff and volunteers who are willing to proofread any proposal. Ideally, we'd like you to give people a week's notice to take time to do that and give it the attention it deserves. So please don't leave it to the last minute of which you want to apply. Awards for All at least has no deadline, so there are some flexibility about that. Now we are now sort of reaching the end of my prepared presentation, so it's really about whether or not you have any questions for me. But the takeaways that I'd like you to take from this is that Awards for All is a really simple, light touch application. Veronica, you've raised your hand. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask a question, or did you not mean to raise your hand?
Yes, I did.
Go for it.
Basically, we've succeeded in we're from Clapham district. We've succeeded in the past quite a couple of times, maybe 3 times, of getting Awards for All grants. And we were advised not to apply as the national charity, because then they said they would just look at how much money the turnover was and etc. And so the times we've been successful, we have been advised to apply just as Clapham district Woodcraft Folk. Recently, we applied again, doing the same. And for the first time ever, we were refused the grant, and we did apply based on the first criterion, the building community one. Yeah. And we did have a new thing. We wanted to take new children, or some older and some new children, to a new place to camp, which we hadn't been to before. And the reason we were given for the refusal was the bit about the community, consulting the community. And so I would just advise people to do some of those things, I think. Do a survey, talk to other organizations. I mean, I think possibly I did it as I'd done before. I said, we consult our own people, we keep in touch with our own people, we email them, we have WhatsApp, we have social media, etc., but not the wider community. And I think that's what they were looking for. They wanted us to be involved with the wider community. So I will try again. I've got another couple of ones I've applied for, but I'll wait and see what they do, and then I will apply again and do perhaps a survey. And also point out that one of the things I do is I go to the Lambeth Voluntary Organisations group, so I'm networking with them. But I didn't bother to do that because in the past that didn't seem to have mattered, although we were talking to our own community regularly. That was sufficient. So I'd just like to make those points and to ask the question, has it changed, this thing about applying? It must have changed, applying through the national organisation.
I mean, it shouldn't have changed. The guidance from the National Lottery has been quite consistent. As a branch organisation, we are one charity, and we should be doing that.
It was, I asked the question, they told me to apply as Clapham District Folk. They told me to do that.
I mean, that's quite difficult, because technically the legal status of Clapham is a branch of the one charity.
Absolutely, but they said call yourself a voluntary community organisation.
Yeah. And our conversations with the Awards for All is that they most definitely should be applying as a charity, using the charity number, and stating that Woodcraft Folk is the name of the organisation, but the day-to-day name is your group in your district. And when it comes to the finances, putting in the finances of your local group. District. And every application that's been put in the last 2 years has done that, or all the successful ones have done that.
Well, I was successful for Common Ground.
Yeah, well, good.
And without, doing it another way. Sorry. Well, I know. Right. I mean, I did what they told me to do.
Yeah.
contacted them and they told me to do that.
Through their phone line?
Yes.
Okay. Well, the national office are telling us that you shouldn't, that you should use the charity organisation so that they can tie us all together.
That wasn't the reason they rejected it.
No, I think that thing about community involvement is a reason why lots of our projects get rejected. And I think I'm about to say something that perhaps maybe I shouldn't say too much. We don't have to go into a really thorough, in-depth research. This isn't a huge amount of money when it comes to the National Lottery, but to do a survey, you can do a survey and maybe only reach 20 or 30 people, but you can still say 75% of them said this.
Yes.
And that's what they're looking for, that there is a demand, and that you have spoken to some people. So it may be just working through your local school or your local community venue where you're already meeting. It doesn't have to be too intensive, but there does need to be something. And that question about how you let other people know, particularly when you're bringing people together, is really, really important. So they will want to see that you're connected and that there are avenues for new people to get involved in those activities. Thank you, Veronica.
Okay.
Are there any other questions? If there are questions, by all means, unmute yourself and ask, but I'm just going to do a bit of a recap. So do apply using the charity number. The really important things is that on the 15th of November, the scope of the fund changes. It suddenly becomes 24 months rather than just 12, and it comes up to 20,000 rather than 10. Now, historically in Wales, it only used to be 5, so this is a huge uplift for Wales. If we're being told that there's no increased chance of being successful if you sneak it in before the 15th or after the 15th of November. So do it when it's right for you. There is no deadline, so it really is about the timing that fits your capacity. You do need to allow 4 months, at least 16 weeks from when you submit the application to when you actually want to start the activity. So think about the timing. So if you're planning on doing a summer camp in 2024, actually now is the time to be applying, because by the time you get a response, it won't be, I'm just trying to remember what month it is, it's nearly October. So you're not going to get a response until March, maybe late February at the moment, if you submitted an application in the next week or two. So the sooner you do it, the better. I think that the majority of Woodcraft Folk applications are more likely to be successful under bringing people together. It's clear in our motto, in our cooperative approach, that that is the one that fits us best. But if your application is focused on training and development of either young leaders or volunteers, then that building the potential of individuals is probably a better fit. And for those organisations who are focused on places and spaces, well, then clearly do that. But actually, because Woodcraft Folk may not be the landowner of that place or space, it may be harder for us to get funding unless that funding is about revenue, i.e. equipment and activities for the young people to engage in that space, rather than longer term improvement in that space. Veronica, go on, do you have another question?
Sorry, yes, I forgot to ask you. We've made, when we've done our applications in the past, we've made them quite broad brush. So we would focus on a particular thing like common ground or something else, but we'd also talk about our regular activities. Do you think it's better to have one specific thing that you're thinking about? Are those the most successful, rather than these are all the things we do for children, bringing the community together, and you know, and we need the hall rents and etc.?
My experience of this is the more specific you are, the more likely you can demonstrate in the word count that's available that you're actually hitting the criteria, and it makes it far more focused to demonstrate that you've done that community involvement and research. Because actually Woodcraft Folk groups do a huge number of things, and it's really hard to articulate that in 300 words. So the more focused you can be, and the narrower your project, the more likely it is to be successful. Now, if you put in a project, say, for £4,000, in the same year, you could put in another project for another £4,000. And another, after the 15th of November, you could put in another one. And that would be allowed under their criteria, because you can hold, after the 15th of November, up to £20,000 as a single grantee, but in multiple applications. So actually, whilst that would create more reporting for you, and maybe I wouldn't necessarily advise it, it is possible. But my advice when writing the application is the more specific you can be, the more likely you are to get the funding that you need. And if anybody wants any proofreading, email it to funding@woodcraft.org.uk, and we will give you some feedback to try and make it as sharp and as clear as possible, to increase your chances of success based on those that have already been successful in the movement. And if you want an example of a successful application, email us and we will send it to you. Are there any other questions?
I can't seem to turn the camera on.
Oh, hi, Jenny.
What's going on there?
We can hear you, Jenny, but I can't see you. Hey, I can see you. Yay.
On my laptop open and my laptop closed. Yes, please, to examples. I think you know what we want examples of.
I think you want examples of some equipment, don't you, Jenny?
I do. I can see Anne's here, so I'll catch up on all the other bits. But
I've recorded it, and the recording will be up in a few days. One of the things that has changed, which I've said more than once already this evening, is that on the 15th of November, the amount of money available through Awards for All doubles.
Yeah.
But the amount of work, both in terms of submitting the application and the end of project report, is exactly the same. And that's the lovely thing about Awards for All, is that they simply want one A4 sheet of paper telling them what you did, and ideally giving them a photograph. And it's really, really simple reporting. So keep a copy of the original application and go, we said we'd do this, this is what we did. Put in a quote, ideally from a volunteer or a young person, saying how much they loved it, stick in a photo, and everybody's really happy. Which, compared to some funders who require lots of thorough monitoring and evaluation, I love the simple light touchness of Awards for All.
Can I have 2 minutes with you about an entirely different topic before
you can, yes, but let me, is there anybody else any other questions? I will stop the recording as well,